The flight from Denver to Portland lifted off under a soft blanket of late afternoon sunlight, the kind that glowed gold against the Rockies and made passengers settle into their seats a little easier. Flight 228 wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. Families returning home, business travelers lost in spreadsheets, college kids with headphones on, an elderly couple holding hands as if the altitude still gave them butterflies. It felt ordinary, predictable, safe. 12-year-old Avery Collins sat in seat 14A with her backpack hugged close to her chest. She always took the window seat. Her mother insisted on it, believing it kept Avery calmer during takeoff. But the truth was, Avery loved flying. Loved it in a way she never told anyone anymore. Her father had been a commercial pilot before the accident, and some of Avery's earliest memories were of sitting on his lap in flight simulators, laughing as the screen dipped through imaginary clouds. They were just games, but she remembered how confidently her father's hands danced across the controls and how he'd say, "You fly with your eyes and your heart, kiddo." He died when she was 10, and since then, every plane felt like a ghost she had to ride through. As the aircraft climbed, she pressed her forehead gently to the window, watching the ground fall away, watching the sun glint off the wings in the way that used to make her father smile. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the steady hum of the engines lull her, letting the rhythm of altitude become a strange kind of comfort. 25 minutes into the flight, turbulence jolted the cabin. A few passengers gasped, clutching armrests. An overhead bin rattled sharply. A baby 3 rows ahead burst into frightened wails. The pilot's voice came on the intercom, calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're hitting a small patch of rough air. Please remain seated." His voice cut out mid-sentence. A second jolt hit harder, causing several passengers to cry out. A flight attendant, Megan, grabbed the back of a seat to steady herself. Something in her eyes flickered, something Avery recognized immediately. Not fear. Not yet. Something like calculation. The look adults get when they're deciding how much truth to share. The lights flickered once, twice. And then the entire cabin plunged into a heavy, humming silence. Not darkness, silence. The engine noise was gone. Gone. It was the absence more than the sound itself that made the passengers freeze. Humans weren't meant to hear silence at 4.5 kilometers above sea level. Planes were loud creatures. They weren't supposed to go quiet. Avery's eyes snapped open. Her breath hitched. She waited, 1 second, 2, 3. Still nothing. The flight attendants exchanged glances so quick and sharp that Avery saw it even from her seat. One unspoken question hovered between them like frost. Why aren't the pilots saying anything? Oxygen masks suddenly dropped from above, swinging like yellow pendulums. Some passengers screamed. Others froze in disbelief. A heavy thud echoed somewhere deep in the aircraft, like the plane itself had exhaled a warning. Avery grabbed her mask with trembling hands and pulled it over her nose and mouth. She'd done it before in simulators, but this wasn't a drill, and her lungs burned with a panic she hadn't expected. The aircraft jerked downward. The descent wasn't steep, yet, but it was wrong. Wrong in a way someone like Avery, who had grown up around pilots, could feel in her bones. Planes didn't descend this way unless someone was telling them to. But in her chest, something whispered, "No one is." Megan hurried down the aisle, her training pushing her into motion even as fear painted her face. "We are experiencing a temporary electrical malfunction," she announced loudly, trying to steady her voice. "Everyone keep your masks on and please remain." She stopped mid-sentence. Because the cockpit door, the door that should have been sealed, locked and secure, was open. Not wide, not inviting. Just cracked open, like someone inside had leaned on it too heavily or like the latch didn't quite catch. A ripple of anxiety moved through the passengers. Megan's breath hitched, her pupils widening. She approached the door with slow steps, as if nearing a wild animal. "Captain," she called. "Captain Hale, First Officer Vance." No answer. She pushed the door gently with her fingertips. It swung an inch. "Captain," she tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. From her seat, Avery felt a coldness spread through her spine. Her hands tightened around the armrests. She didn't know why, but her mind replayed all the things her father taught her about cockpit protocol. If oxygen masks dropped in the cabin, if the engines lost power, if communication cut out, the pilots should have made announcements, checked in, initiated emergency procedures. But they hadn't, not even once. "What's happening?" an anxious man in row 9 called out. "Why aren't the pilots talking?" a woman near the front asked what everyone was thinking. Megan ignored both. She tried the keypad beside the cockpit door, typed in the emergency override code. Red light. Denied. Her face drained of color. There were only 2 ways that could happen. The pilots manually locked the door. The system malfunctioned because something was critically failing inside. The plane dropped again, sharper this time. A few passengers screamed. One man vomited into a sick bag. Luggage shifted dangerously in the overhead bins as gravity tilted unpredictably. Avery stood. It wasn't brave. It wasn't confident. Her legs shook so hard she could barely push herself into the aisle, but something pulled her forward, something louder than fear. No one else understood what she understood. She stepped toward Megan. "I think I know what's wrong," Avery said, her voice thin but steady. Megan blinked down at her. "Honey, stay in your seat." "No," Avery looked straight into her eyes. "There's an access hatch above the cockpit. If the door won't open, I can get through from the maintenance panel." Megan's lips parted. Shock flickered across her face. "How could you possibly know that?" "My dad was a pilot," Avery whispered. "He taught me everything." Another violent drop threw several passengers sideways. A laptop flew off a tray table and hit the floor with a sharp crack. Megan steadied herself, staring at the young girl who seemed too small for the storm unfolding around them. Avery swallowed hard. "We don't hear the engines," she said softly, eyes glistening. "And they're not answering. Something's wrong in there." The plane shuddered again. Her next words came out barely audible. "If no one's going in, then I have to." And with that, Megan made a decision that would haunt her forever. She nodded, and Avery stepped toward the galley, toward the ceiling panel, toward a dark unknown. Having no idea what waited for her on the other side of that hatch. The moment Avery stepped into the narrow galley, the plane lurched again, harder than before. A food cart rolled 2 inches, its brakes screeching against the cabin floor. Megan caught it with her hip, her face tightening with rising dread. She looked back toward the cockpit, then toward the trembling passengers, then toward Avery, the child who suddenly felt like the only person aboard who wasn't frozen in fear. The intercom crackled once. Everyone held their breath. But no voice followed. Nothing. That wasn't a malfunction. That was silence. And silence meant the pilots weren't talking, couldn't talk, or something had happened so abruptly they never had the chance. Megan knelt beside Avery, her hands resting on the girl's small shoulders. The plane trembled beneath them like an unsteady heartbeat. "Listen to me," Megan said softly. "We're going to try this together, but you stay right next to me until—" A scream cut her off from the cabin. "What's happening?" someone yelled. "We're dropping, do something." A woman clutched her toddler, sobbing uncontrollably as the oxygen mask bounced against her cheek. A teenage boy prayed out loud. The elderly couple in row 3 gripped hands so tightly their knuckles went white. Panic was spreading like a contagion. If it hit full force, chaos would erupt, and Megan knew they couldn't afford that. She turned back to Avery. "We don't have much time." Avery nodded. She felt tiny under the weight of Megan's stare, but something hot, Something stubborn burned behind her ribs. She wasn't brave. She wasn't fearless. She was terrified, but she was also her father's daughter, and if she didn't act now, no one might. Megan reached up to the ceiling panel just above the cockpit bulkhead. She pressed her fingers to the emergency latch, bracing her body against the swaying cabin. "You're sure about this access point?" she asked. Avery nodded. "My dad said some aircraft keep backup paths for emergencies. If the cockpit door jams or locks, this is one of them." A loud bang echoed from outside, air pressure shifting violently. The plane dropped again, sending 2 water bottles rolling down the aisle. A man lost his grip on the seat in front of him and slid into the aisle, cursing in terror. Avery's heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she felt it in her ears. Megan pulled the panel free. A cold burst of air swept down, carrying the smell of metal, fuel, and something else, something like burnt plastic. The maintenance crawlspace above was barely big enough for a child. Perfect for Avery. Terrifying for everyone else. Megan lifted her carefully. Avery gripped the edges and pulled herself inside, her palms slick with fear. The metal creaked beneath her weight. Behind her, a passenger shouted, "She's a kid. What are you doing?" Another voice followed, "We need the pilots, not a child." Megan ignored them. "Go, honey, slow and steady." The hatch closed slightly beneath Avery as she crawled forward, plunging her into dimness. Her knees scraped metal. Her fingers trailed along pipes, wires, and ridged aluminum. The air was colder than she expected, sharp, thin, filled with electrical noises that buzzed in her bones. Below her, she heard muffled arguing. "Tell her to come back. This is insane. We need an adult up there." Megan snapped back. "If any adult here knows how to bypass a locked cockpit, tell me right now." Silence swallowed the cabin. Avery crawled deeper. Her breath fogged in front of her, and each inhale burned with dry cold. A string of emergency lights flickered along the narrow ceiling, giving her just enough illumination to see where the passage sloped downward, toward a small rectangular opening. The entrance to the cockpit. Her pulse quickened. Every sound seemed amplified, the metal groaning, wires humming, the faint whistle of air leaking from somewhere near the nose of the plane. She whispered to herself, "Dad, I need to be brave." The opening grew larger with each shuffle of her knees. Behind her, the plane jolted violently. The maintenance tube shuddered. Avery's elbow slipped on a smooth pipe, and she slammed against the wall with a small cry. A burst of sparks flickered from somewhere ahead. The whole space shook like the aircraft had hit an invisible wave. She froze, clinging to a support beam. Her breathing quickened into sharp, panicked gasps. What if she fell through? What if she got trapped up here? What if the tube snapped open, and she tumbled down into wires and machinery? She squeezed her eyes shut and pictured her father's hands guiding hers over a simulator throttle. "Remember, kiddo," he had said once with a smile, "planes are loud, but confidence has to be louder." She took a shaky breath. Then she crawled forward again. As the cockpit access panel came into reach, she saw something that made her stomach twist. A ripple of smoke, thin, gray, almost invisible, drifted from the crack between the panel and the frame. Oh no! Her heart thudded so hard it hurt. Smoke meant electrical damage. Damage meant the pilots might not just be unconscious, they could be hurt, or worse. A wave of nausea washed over her, but she pushed forward. She grabbed the metal latch, slid her fingers underneath, and lifted with all her strength. The panel swung open, and she dropped feet first into the cockpit. Her shoes hit the floor with a thud. Then she saw them. The captain, the first officer, slumped forward in their seats like rag dolls, oxygen masks dangling above them, alarms flashing across the control panel in an angry chorus of red and orange. They weren't moving. Avery's blood went cold. She stumbled forward, her heartbeat filling her ears. "Captain," she whispered. "Sir." No answer. She reached out and touched the captain's shoulder. His skin felt clammy. His breathing was shallow, barely there. The first officer looked the same. Avery's voice trembled. "No, no, no, no." She spun toward the controls, eyes darting across flashing warnings, blinking lights and error codes. Cabin pressure failure. Engine power disruptions. Stabilizer malfunction. Autopilot disabled. The aircraft had been flying itself into a slow, deadly descent. Her legs wobbled. She grabbed the back of the pilot's seat to steady herself. The radio hissing weak static. The air sharp with burnt wires. The plane tilting more sharply by the second. Megan banged on the cockpit door from behind. "Avery, Avery, what's happening?" Avery's throat tightened so hard she could barely speak. She pulled herself into the pilot's seat, her father's seat in another life, and whispered with a trembling voice. "They're alive, but they can't fly." She looked at the useless radio, at the dead engine readings, at the falling altitude. A tear slipped down her cheek. I think I'm the only one who can stop this." And as her trembling hands reached toward the controls, a piercing alarm erupted, louder than anything so far, shaking the cockpit with a scream that meant one thing. Something else had just failed. Avery's small hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the narrow maintenance crawlspace. Every movement sent shivers through her arms and legs. The plane was still dropping, tilting slightly with each gust of turbulence, and the groaning metal around her amplified the fear that had settled in her chest. Yet amid the panic, a strange clarity took hold. She knew what she had to do. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Planes respond to confidence, not panic. Your hands and your mind have to move together. Trust yourself, kiddo." Avery whispered, "Okay, Dad, I trust you." And in a way, that voice did guide her. The ceiling panel above the cockpit grew larger as she crawled forward. Dust and insulation brushed her face. The hum of electricity and pressurized air surrounded her, turning the crawlspace into a tense, alien corridor. She could hear the cabin below, the muffled cries of frightened passengers, the shouts of flight attendants, and Megan's urgent voice calling for updates. "I've got it, Megan," Avery whispered. "Just stay calm." The hatch to the cockpit was just a few feet ahead. Avery pressed herself forward, feeling her knees scrape against the metal ribs. She reached for the latch, the one her father had shown her in a flight simulator years ago, and felt the weight of what she was about to do. Behind the closed cockpit door, the alarms had stopped intermittently, only to be replaced by a dull, unrelenting hum. Avery's stomach turned. The silence was louder than the noise. "Please be okay, please be okay," she muttered under her breath. Then, as her fingers slipped beneath the latch, she felt a sudden vibration, something metallic groaning above the autopilot panel. Her heart leapt into her throat. Sparks flickered faintly, sending a small puff of smoke into her face. Avery recoiled but forced herself forward. She lifted the hatch carefully, peeking inside. And froze. The cockpit wasn't empty. The captain slumped forward over the yoke, his mask dangling uselessly. The first officer lay sideways, fingers twitching as though in a final, futile attempt to grab the controls. Both were breathing, but it was shallow, sporadic, and terrifyingly weak. Avery's mind raced. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. They didn't have a chance to respond. She could feel the temperature drop in the small space, the pressure shift, the faint smell of burnt circuits and fear. Her gaze darted to the control panel. Warning lights flashed like angry eyes. Engine failure, cabin pressure, autopilot offline. The yoke shook slightly, nudged by the plane's turbulence. Avery's stomach lurched. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Megan pounding the cockpit door. "Avery, what's happening? Are you okay?" "I'm okay, I think," Avery called back, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She swallowed hard. The pilots, they can't fly. The realization hit like ice in her veins. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a simulator. She was the only one who could take control of a plane at 12 years old. Her fingers hovered over the controls. She remembered every trick her dad had taught her: how to level the plane, how to engage the autopilot, how to read the instruments. She could do this. She had to do this. The plane lurched violently to the right. Avery clung to the yoke for balance. Sparks flew from the panel above her. The cabin below tilted, screams and cries rising in a crescendo. She felt every eye on her, every soul aboard depending on her in ways she had never imagined. Her hands shook, but she steadied them. "You can do this, just like Dad showed you." She reached for the radio. Static greeted her. She tried again. Nothing. The plane had lost communication. She swallowed. This was it. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't rely on anyone. A soft bang from below jolted her. Passengers were being thrown into one another, luggage flying. Avery's stomach churned. She gritted her teeth and gripped the yoke, forcing herself to focus. First, stabilize the plane. Her small hands moved with surprising precision, pushing and pulling, nudging the yoke gently. The plane responded, quivering but holding. Avery's breath came in ragged gasps. "Okay, okay, I can do this." Then she noticed the engine gauges. One was sputtering, warning lights flaring red. If it failed completely, they'd lose power. She bit her lip, feeling fear claw at her throat. She remembered her father's voice. "Plan for the worst, hope for the best. Always look for your options." She glanced down at the first officer. He was slumped further, barely conscious. She had no time to worry about him. The plane needed her now. A sudden jolt made her heart stop. The plane tilted dangerously. She gripped the yoke with all her strength. A cry escaped her lips, half panic, half determination. She pulled back gently, remembering the flare technique from her father's lessons. The nose of the plane leveled slightly. The altitude held. Avery blinked away tears, realizing she had done it just for a moment. Below, the passengers hadn't noticed yet. Above, the cockpit still hummed with danger. And then the thought struck her with full force: this is just the beginning. Her hands hovered over the controls again. She had to keep the plane steady, maintain altitude, and figure out how to land. She was 12, alone in a cockpit with two incapacitated pilots and a plane that could plummet at any moment. The intercom crackled weakly. Avery's heart leapt. "Flight 228, this is the cockpit. Do you read me?" "Nothing." A wave of nausea swept over her. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. Her father's lessons had been clear. Panic was the enemy. Confidence, even borrowed confidence, was the only way through. She pressed her lips together and reached toward the throttle. "I can do this. I have to do this." A sudden crash of turbulence threw her sideways. She hit the edge of the yoke, scraped her arm, and almost lost her balance. Her fingers grazed the radio again, hopping for a signal. Below, Megan shouted, "Avery, talk to me." "I'm trying." Avery's voice cracked, barely audible. I'm going to. I need you to. Okay, just stay calm." The plane shuddered again, alarms screaming. Sparks flew from the panel near the autopilot. Avery's hands shook violently. She glanced at the pilots again, still barely alive, still waiting for someone to save them. But now she realized something terrifying. There was no one else. There was only her. And in that moment, her resolve hardened. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and whispered, "Okay, Dad, if you're really here, guide me. Because I don't know how to land a plane, but I have to try." The plane pitched downward slightly, and Avery's stomach dropped. Her hands gripped the controls tighter. Sparks flared again. Alarms rang in her ears. She swallowed her fear and steadied her trembling hands, knowing that whatever came next would decide the fate of everyone on board. And just as the first thought of landing crossed her mind, the plane lurched violently to the left, a terrifying reminder. She wasn't just fighting gravity, she was fighting time. The only thing she could do now was keep fighting. Avery's small frame dropped fully into the cockpit, landing awkwardly on the captain's side. The cold metal seat pressed against her thighs, and the smell of burnt circuits and recycled air filled her nose. Her heart raced uncontrollably as she took in the scene before her. Both pilots slumped over their controls, barely breathing, their oxygen masks dangling uselessly. The warning lights on the instrument panel flashed angrily, red and yellow alerts reflecting off Avery's wide, terrified eyes. The altitude indicator showed a slow but steady drop. Engine gauges glowed ominously, one sputtering with a faint metallic cough. The plane's autopilot had disengaged completely. For a moment she froze, panic clawed at her chest. This wasn't a simulator. This wasn't a game. This was real. And there were 142 people, men, women, children, elderly passengers, depending on her in ways she had never imagined. She tried to call for help over the radio. Static. Nothing. Dead silence except for the hum of failing systems. Her hands shook as she reached for the yoke. She remembered the lessons from her father. When everything falls apart, trust your instincts, trust your hands, and don't let fear paralyze you. Avery exhaled sharply and gripped the yoke with both hands. The plane lurched again, violently. Sparks flew from a nearby panel, showering a faint light across her face. She felt her stomach drop as the plane tilted slightly, passengers below screaming. She steadied herself, willing her fingers to obey. Below, Megan's voice shouted from the cabin, "Avery, what's happening? Are you all right?" I'm okay," Avery called back, voice trembling. "I'm trying to stay calm." Her eyes darted to the captain. He was still breathing faintly. The first officer twitched slightly, but neither could respond. Avery swallowed her fear. There was no time for despair. She needed to act. Her gaze fell on the control panel. Warning lights flashed, engine failure, cabin pressure, altitude alert. Her fingers hovered above the switches, unsure where to begin. Then she saw it, a small digital readout indicating fuel imbalance. She remembered her father explaining that the throttle needed careful adjustment to stabilize a failing engine. Her hands moved cautiously, nudging the throttle lever forward. The plane quivered. Sparks flickered again. Alarms blared. The cockpit shuddered violently, throwing her elbow against the yoke. She clenched her teeth, ignoring the pain. "You can do this. You have to do this." The plane tilted again. Avery gritted her teeth and pulled gently back on the yoke, recalling her father's advice about leveling the nose during turbulence. Slowly, agonizingly, the plane stabilized, holding a wavering altitude. A tear slipped down her cheek. Relief was fleeting. There was no time to celebrate. Every second counted. Every heartbeat aboard that plane was a reminder failure wasn't an option. The radio hissed again. She grabbed the handset, voice cracking. "Mayday, mayday, this is Flight 228. The pilots are unconscious. I'm 12. I need guidance." Static answered her. She gritted her teeth. "No one is coming to help me. Not yet. This is my job." Her small hands moved across the switches, toggling autopilot functions, trying to coax the plane into stability. She had never actually flown a real aircraft, only simulators. But somehow, her memory of her father's hands guiding hers carried over. Muscle memory merged with instinct. She nudged the yoke, pulled the throttle, and adjusted the trim. The plane responded, wobbling but holding. Avery allowed herself a small inhale. She wasn't safe, not even close, but she was in control. Then she noticed the cabin lights flickering violently. A low rumble came from the engines, a sputter, cough, and a dangerous whine that made her stomach drop. The right engine was failing. If it went completely, they would lose altitude rapidly. Avery's hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. "Stay calm. Stay focused. You can fix this." She adjusted the left throttle, trying to compensate for the failing engine. The plane tilted dangerously, but she held it, leaning into the controls with all her strength. A sudden jolt made her elbow knock against the emergency radio. Sparks flew, a small smoke trail rising. Avery panicked for a split second, then forced herself to steady her hands. You can't give up. Not now. She glanced at the pilots again. They were alive, just barely. That was enough. That had to be enough. She couldn't afford to think about death, only action. The cockpit door shook as Megan continued banging from below. Avery called back. I see them. They're alive, but they can't move. I'm trying to stabilize the plane. The plane lurched violently again. Avery's knees hit the instrument panel. She gritted her teeth against the pain. Sparks flew again. A warning siren screamed in her ears. The cabin below shook. The passengers screamed, some clutching each other, some praying, some sobbing. Avery's mind raced. Altitude dropping, right engine failing, landing options unknown. She had never seen this scenario simulated. Every action she took was guesswork, but she had to act. Her hands flew over the instruments, pulling levers, pushing buttons, flipping switches she didn't fully understand. But gradually, slowly, the plane leveled. The alarming red lights dimmed just slightly. Avery exhaled, exhausted. She had done it, she had held the plane steady. But then a new warning flashed, this time for hydraulic pressure. The flaps might not respond. The landing would be even more dangerous than she imagined. Her stomach sank. There were miles of terrain below, forests, rivers, cities, but nothing she could trust to absorb a crashing plane. Her heart raced. Sweat ran down her forehead. She leaned forward, whispering under her breath, "Dad, I need you. Please guide me." The plane groaned again, tilting slightly. Sparks crackled near the control panel. The cabin lights flickered violently. Avery's breath caught in her throat. Megan's voice shouted from below, nearly lost in the chaos. "Avery, what do we do now?" Avery swallowed, trembling. She realized fully that this was no longer about holding the plane steady. This was about survival. For her, for the passengers, for everyone aboard. Her hands gripped the yoke with determination she didn't know she had. "We can make it. We have to." And then the plane lurched violently once more. This time, a loud metallic crack echoed from the fuselage. Avery's eyes widened. She felt the plane's nose dip dangerously. Sparks flew again. Alarms blared. The plane shuddered like a living thing in pain. Avery leaned into the controls, whispering through her fear. "Okay, I can do this. I have to do this. I will do this." She didn't know if she was talking to herself or her father. The cockpit door rattled. Megan shouted something, but Avery barely heard it. Then from somewhere deep within the plane, a new sound joined the chaos. A faint cracking, as if the aircraft itself was protesting. Avery's stomach dropped. She realized with a sudden cold clarity that this was only the beginning. And whatever came next would demand everything she had and more. Avery's trembling hands hovered over the radio, the static crackling like distant thunder. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was impossible. She was 12. She was a child. She had never flown a real plane, only simulators in a classroom she shared with the ghost of her father's voice. And yet here she was, at 4.5 kilometers above the Earth, gripping the yoke of a plummeting aircraft, the lives of 142 passengers depending on her tiny hands. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 228, she shouted, voice cracking. "The pilots are unconscious. I'm 12, I need help." Static. Her heart sank, no response. Her voice trembled with fear and desperation. She gritted her teeth and tried again. "This is Flight 228. Can anyone hear me? Please, anyone respond." For a moment she thought the radio had failed completely. Then, a crackle, faint at first, like someone was picking up the signal across a stormy night. "Flight 228, identify yourself." A calm, authoritative voice finally responded. Avery froze. The voice was real, clear, human, someone on the other end of the airwaves. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. This is Flight 228, she stammered. I'm a 12-year-old. The pilots are unconscious. I don't know how to land a plane, but I have to try. Silence. Then the voice returned, carefully measured, thick with disbelief and concern. Okay, slow down, breathe. You're saying the pilots are unconscious. Avery nodded to herself as if the person could see her through the radio. Yes, I think so. I don't know what happened, but they can't move. I can hold the plane, but I don't know what to do next. The controller's voice softened slightly, though tension threaded every word. All right, I hear you, Avery. I need you to stay calm. I'm going to guide you. We'll get through this together. The words were like a lifeline. Avery clutched the yoke with both hands, heart hammering, and focused on keeping the plane level. The turbulence raged on, violent and unpredictable, shaking the aircraft. Sparks popped from the control panel, alarms screaming in a relentless chorus. The controller's voice cut through the chaos. Listen carefully. First, you need to stabilize your altitude. I need you to pull the throttle slightly forward on the left engine, just a small amount. Can you do that? Avery's fingers shook violently as she reached for the throttle. Her mind raced, recalling everything her father had taught her about engine management. Slowly, carefully, she nudged it forward. The plane wobbled, then leveled, responding to her movements. Yes, yes, she breathed, a flicker of hope igniting inside her. Good, the controller said. Now keep it steady. The right engine is showing signs of failure. It's sputtering. I need you to monitor it, but don't make sudden changes. Avery nodded, though the man couldn't see her. Her small hands flew over the instruments, her eyes scanning every warning light. Sparks flared again near the autopilot panel. She flinched, but kept her hands firm. Below, passengers screamed, cried, and prayed. Some clung to strangers, others whispered hurried messages to loved ones. The plane continued its descent, each second stretching into an eternity. Avery felt the weight of every life on board. The controller's voice cut in again. Avery, look at your altitude and the nearest terrain. You have to start planning for a landing. I don't know your exact position yet, but there's a frozen lake approximately 20 miles ahead. It's your best option. Can you see it? Avery squinted through the cockpit window. The trees rushed past, the mountains looming, snow-capped and silent. Then, glimmering through the gray, she saw it, a wide sheet of ice, reflecting the dim afternoon light like a mirror. Her heart skipped a beat. I see it, she whispered, barely audible, but it looks thin in places. It's all you've got, the controller said firmly. We'll guide you down. Stay calm and follow my instructions. Pull back slightly as we approach. Keep the nose level. You can do this. Avery's stomach twisted. She remembered her father's words. Confidence must be louder than fear. Her hands gripped the yoke with renewed determination. She took a deep breath, trying to control the shaking in her body. The plane lurched violently. Sparks flew from the panel, smoke curling near the autopilot switch. Alarms screamed. Avery's fingers trembled, but she pressed on, nudging the yoke, adjusting the throttle, trying to maintain a steady glide. Good, good, the controller encouraged. You're doing well, keep her steady. Don't panic. The landing will be tricky, but we can get everyone out alive if you stay focused. Avery's pulse thundered in her ears. She glanced at the captain, who had shifted slightly, breathing faintly. The first officer stirred as well. That tiny spark of life bolstered Avery's resolve. She could do this. She had to. Suddenly, a sharp metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. The right engine coughed violently. The plane tilted dangerously to the right. Avery's stomach dropped. She pressed the throttle with every ounce of strength she had, trying to stabilize it. Sparks burst again from the panel. Keep it steady, don't let her tip, the controller shouted. Yes, I'm trying, Avery cried. The plane leveled, but only barely. Avery's arms ached, sweat stinging her eyes. She swallowed, forcing herself to breathe to focus. Every second brought them closer to the lake. The controller's voice softened, almost reassuring. "You're going to make it, Avery. I'm right here with you. Keep your hands firm and follow my instructions. Don't let go of the yoke." Avery nodded, though he couldn't see her. She adjusted the flaps, nudged the throttle, and guided the plane toward the frozen mirror below. The ice reflected the afternoon light, broken only by cracks and snow patches. She swallowed the fear rising in her throat. The plane shuddered again, warning lights blazing. She felt the engine's vibrations through the yoke, every tremor sending jolts up her arms. And in that moment, Avery realized fully. She was no longer a child pretending in a simulator. She was a pilot, a savior, the only thing standing between 142 lives and disaster. Her hands tightened on the controls. The lake loomed closer, sparks flared, alarms screamed. The plane tilted again. And Avery knew the hardest part was about to begin. The plane shuddered violently, a metallic groan echoing through the fuselage like a warning bell. Avery's small hands clutched the yoke as she fought to maintain control. Her heart pounded in her chest, sweat stinging her eyes, and the warnings on the dashboard flashed red with alarming urgency. "Engine 2, right side, failure imminent," the controller warned over the radio. "You need to compensate immediately, Avery." Avery's stomach dropped. The right engine coughed violently, sputtering, and then, a violent shudder, complete silence. Sparks flew from the console, a small arc of fire dancing along the edge of the panel. The plane tilted sharply to the right. Panic clawed at her, but she forced herself to remember her father's words. Confidence must be louder than fear. Her hands moved instinctively, nudging the yoke to counter the tilt. She pushed the throttle forward on the left engine, feeling its vibrations pulse through her arms. The plane responded slightly, wobbling but refusing to tip completely. Avery's breath caught. She could do this. She had to. Below, passengers screamed, gripping seats, clutching loved ones. The plane pitched violently with every breath of wind, groaning as the compromised engine dragged it down. Avery's mind raced. Every action mattered. Every second counted. "Focus, Avery. Focus on the glide. Level the nose," the controller shouted. "Yes, yes, I'm trying," Avery cried, teeth clenched, eyes wide. Sparks popped again from the panel. Smoke curled into her face. She flinched but kept her hands firm. The frozen lake below glimmered like a silver mirror, reflecting the late afternoon sun. The only option. The only hope. She swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. The plane's nose drifted downward slightly. She nudged the yoke back, carefully balancing the weight of the remaining engine, trying to maintain a steady descent. "Adjust your flaps slightly. Compensate for drag. You're doing fine," the controller instructed. Avery's fingers flew over the switches. She recalled her father's lessons about trimming and stabilizing. Slowly, painstakingly, the plane leveled, though turbulence still rocked it like a living thing. Sparks continued to flicker from the panel above, smoke curling into the cockpit. Her small hands trembled, but she refused to let go. A sudden warning tone pierced the cockpit, a low, ominous alarm signaling hydraulic pressure loss. The flaps might not respond fully. Avery's stomach lurched. She had never dealt with this in a simulator, never imagined it. She bit her lip, fighting panic, and adjusted manually as best she could. "Stay with me, Dad," she whispered under her breath. "We can do this, we have to." The plane lurched again. Avery's arm scraped against the edge of the panel. Sparks flared, smoke curling across her vision. Her hands shook violently, but she held the yoke with all her strength, willing the aircraft to obey. Below, the passengers continued to scream, some praying aloud, some whispering messages to loved ones. Avery felt the weight of every life aboard. She was responsible for them all, 12 years old, alone, with 2 incapacitated pilots beside her. The controller's voice came through again, steady but urgent. "Avery, you need to start aligning for the lake. Keep your nose slightly up. Glide as smoothly as possible. You'll need to touch down at a minimal speed." Avery nodded, though he couldn't see her. She focused entirely on the frozen mirror below. The distance closed rapidly. Trees and rocks flashed by on either side, a stark reminder of the stakes. One mistake, one miscalculation, and she couldn't even think about the consequences. Her hands flew over the instruments, nudging the throttle, adjusting the trim. The plane tilted slightly with a strong gust of wind. She corrected with small, precise movements, repeating silently, "Steady, steady, steady." The plane groaned again. The right engine lay silent, dead weight pulling it to the side. Avery had to fight against it constantly, every second a battle of physics and instinct. Sparks continued to pop from the instrument panel. Smoke curled into her hair. Her arms stung from scraping the console. The frozen lake was just ahead, gleaming brighter now. She could see cracks in the ice, patches of snow, and the thin, brittle areas that could shatter on impact. Her heart raced. She needed to land on the strongest part. The flaps were partially functional. The landing would be delicate, precise, and terrifying. "Keep her level," the controller urged. "Touch down gently, minimal speed. You've got this." Avery exhaled sharply. She focused, ignoring the pain in her arms, the sweat stinging her eyes, the chaos below. She had one chance, one shot, one perfect landing. She nudged the yoke, adjusted the throttle, and focused entirely on the ice beneath. The plane descended steadily now. Sparks popped one last time. Alarms continued, but Avery blocked them out. She was aware only of the glide, the frozen lake ahead, and the people depending on her. The first hint of panic struck when a gust of wind caught the plane's left wing. The nose tilted slightly. Avery's stomach dropped. She pushed against it with all her strength, correcting the tilt just enough. She glanced at the captain and first officer. Both were alive, barely. Seeing them breathing, even faintly, gave her a flicker of courage. The ice grew closer. Trees disappeared from either side. The plane shuddered as it touched down lightly, skimming over the frozen surface. Avery's pulse thundered. Sparks flew from the panel as she applied minor corrections. The plane bounced slightly on the ice but held. "Keep her steady," the controller shouted. Avery's hands were trembling, but she maintained a steady glide. The plane skidded across the frozen mirror, wobbling dangerously at first, then gradually slowing. The remaining engine hummed, supporting the descent. Passengers screamed, some in terror, some in relief, as the plane touched down fully. The fuselage groaned, the nose dipping slightly before leveling. Avery applied careful pressure to the throttle, bringing it to a slow stop. Silence fell. The cabin was tense. The passengers were frozen, gripping each other, unsure whether to scream or cry. Avery exhaled, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had landed the plane. Below, Megan and the crew rushed forward, assisting shaken passengers. Avery looked at the controller's voice through the radio. "You did it, Avery. You really did it." A wave of relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. The plane was still compromised. The ice could crack. Sparks still smoldered in the cockpit. The pilots were still unconscious. And she was 12, alone. And in that moment, Avery realized the truth. The hardest part wasn't surviving the landing. It was surviving the aftermath. Avery's hands trembled as the plane finally came to a precarious stop on the frozen lake. The fuselage shuddered slightly, settling against the ice, which groaned beneath the weight of the aircraft. Outside, the late afternoon sun glinted against the thin, brittle ice, highlighting cracks and fissures that could betray them at any moment. Every passenger remained frozen in their seats, some staring wide-eyed, some crying, others shaking uncontrollably. Megan's voice rang out, urgent yet filled with awe. "Everyone, stay calm. We need to prepare for evacuation." Avery blinked through tears, overwhelmed by relief and fear all at once. She glanced around the cockpit. The pilots were still unconscious, their faces pale beneath the dim light of the console. Sparks smoldered near the autopilot panel, but no flames had broken out. The plane was damaged, but it hadn't broken apart. Her chest heaved. For a brief moment it felt like triumph, but she knew better. The frozen lake was unstable and the temperature was dropping fast. Every second mattered. "Stay seated," Megan called again, running down the aisle. "Keep your belts fastened until we can assess the ice." Passengers began murmuring, whispering frantic questions, their eyes darting to the windows. Panic threatened to rise again. Avery swallowed and forced herself to speak over the intercom, her small voice surprisingly strong. "This is Avery. Everyone stay calm. The plane is okay for now. Help is on the way." She didn't know if her voice would calm them. She didn't even know if she sounded believable. But a few passengers nodded, some clinging to hope like a lifeline. Outside, the wind picked up, sending shards of ice sparkling in the sunlight. Avery's stomach twisted. She had no experience with actual emergency evacuations, only the simulations she had practiced with her father. But she knew one thing: panic would be deadly. Megan climbed into the cockpit beside her. "You did it," she said softly, awestruck. "You actually did it. Avery, you saved all of us." Avery blinked, overwhelmed by emotion. Her hand still gripped the yoke. "We're not out of danger yet," she said, voice shaky. "The ice, it could crack. We need to move carefully." Megan nodded. "I know. We're going to get everyone off safely. Can you help us coordinate?" Avery took a deep breath, forcing her hands to relax on the controls. Yes, we can do this. We need to go row by row, stay calm, and keep weight evenly distributed." The passengers, slowly realizing they had survived the landing, began to follow instructions. Flight attendants helped those in wheelchairs, parents held their children, and passengers braced themselves for the next challenge, walking carefully across the frozen lake to the shore. Avery watched as the first group shuffled out, tension thick in the air. She felt her stomach drop every time the ice groaned. Every crack made her heart leap. The frozen surface stretched for hundreds of meters, uneven and dangerous. Suddenly, a sharp, echoing crack ran beneath the plane. Avery gasped. "Everyone freeze, don't move too quickly." Megan grabbed her shoulder. "The ice, it's shifting. We need to keep calm but move steadily." Passengers froze, wide-eyed, waiting for instructions. Avery's mind raced. If they panicked, the ice could break beneath them. If they moved too slowly, the cold could overwhelm the children and elderly. Every decision mattered. Avery's small hands trembled, but she raised her voice. "One row at a time. Hold hands if you need to. Follow the crew and do exactly as we say." Slowly, methodically, the passengers began to inch forward, distributing weight across the ice. Avery watched every movement, her eyes flicking to cracks that crept toward the plane. Sparks from the cockpit panel crackled again, smoke curling into the small space. The right engines remained smoldered faintly, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Avery felt a shiver run down her spine. She had flown a plane. She had landed it on ice. She had saved over 100 lives, but the danger wasn't over. A sudden shout pierced the tense silence. "The ice under the rear door." Avery's stomach plummeted. Megan spun, assessing the situation. "Everyone freeze, move toward the front, keep your balance." Passengers shifted quickly, guided by Megan and the crew. Avery's hands gripped the yoke instinctively, as if she could somehow steady the plane from here. Sparks from the cockpit flickered again, a reminder that even the aircraft wasn't completely stable. One of the elderly passengers stumbled, and a crew member caught him just in time. Avery's heart pounded as the ice cracked slightly beneath another group, the sound echoing like gunfire across the frozen surface. "Keep moving, stay calm," Avery shouted, voice cracking. Finally, the last passengers shuffled forward, moving away from the rear doors. Megan counted heads, her face pale but determined. "Everyone accounted for," she said. "Now we just need to get off the plane." Avery glanced at the pilots. Both were still unconscious but stable. Medical personnel would be here soon. She felt a flicker of hope. But then a loud, thunderous crack split the air. The ice beneath the plane shuddered violently. Avery's stomach dropped. Sparks flew from the cockpit panel as the fuselage tilted slightly. "Hold on," Megan shouted. "Everyone brace yourselves." The plane lurched. Avery gripped the yoke with all her strength, instinctively steadying the nose. The ice held, but barely. The passengers froze, faces pale with fear. Avery's mind raced. She realized fully, the plane might be safe for now, but the frozen lake was a ticking clock. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the ice could give way. Every movement from now on had to be calculated. She took a deep breath, fighting the panic rising in her chest. "We can do this," she whispered. "We have to." Megan nodded beside her. "You let us hear, Avery. You'll guide us off the ice too, just stay calm." Avery swallowed hard. Sparks continued to pop in the cockpit, smoke curling through the cabin. The plane's controls still hummed faintly, though the engines were dead. She looked out at the ice, shimmering and fragile, and realized they were not just survivors, they were pioneers now. Every careful step, every calm instruction, every act of courage would determine whether they lived or died. And in that moment, Avery felt something she had never felt before, a deep, unshakable sense of responsibility. She was 12. She had flown a plane. She had landed it on ice. And now she would guide over 100 people to safety across a frozen, cracking lake. The tension hung in the air, thick and electric. One wrong move, one crack too far, and everything could collapse. But Avery's resolve burned brighter than fear. The first passenger reached solid ground. Avery's pulse quickened. One by one, they moved forward slowly, carefully, as the sun dipped lower in the sky. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible, "Almost there, almost there." But even as relief began to flicker, a deep groan rumbled beneath the plane. The ice shifted again. Sparks flared in the cockpit. Avery's stomach dropped. And in that instant she realized fully, their survival depended on her entirely, completely. And the final test had only just begun. The last passenger set foot on solid ground, the frozen lake behind them groaning and cracking with every movement. Avery's small hand still gripped the yoke, though the plane was now empty of life aside from the unconscious pilots beside her. Her chest heaved, sweat and tears streaking her face. The adrenaline that had carried her through the impossible flight was fading, leaving her exhausted but alive. Outside, the wind cut sharply across the ice. Megan ran to Avery's side, pulling her gently from the cockpit. "You did it, Avery. You saved everyone," she said, voice shaking with awe. Avery could barely nod, her limbs heavy from exhaustion, her mind still racing. The passengers clustered on the solid shore, many sobbing, some hugging strangers, others whispering prayers of thanks. News crews, emergency personnel, and medical teams had already begun arriving, sirens wailing in the distance. The surreal spectacle of a massive passenger plane perched precariously on a frozen lake drew murmurs of disbelief and fear from onlookers. Avery glanced back at the aircraft. The fuselage rested on the ice, slightly tilted, smoke still curling from the cockpit panel. She could see the faint cracks spiderwebbing across the frozen surface, a reminder of how close they had all come to disaster. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of what she had done. "Come on," Megan urged, taking Avery's hand. "You need to step away from the plane. You've done everything you can." Avery stumbled forward, still holding onto Megan for support. She didn't notice the crowd gathering around, cameras flashing, phones recording every detail. People were staring at her like she was a miracle, because she was. A 12-year-old girl who had flown a plane, saved 2 incapacitated pilots, and guided 142 people to safety. Paramedics rushed toward the cockpit to attend to the pilots. Avery's father's face, pale and anxious, appeared from the crowd. He pushed through emergency personnel, eyes wide, hands trembling. "Avery, oh my God, you're alive." Tears welled in Avery's eyes as she ran toward him. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I did it, Dad. I saved them all." Her father held her tightly, his own tears falling. Yes, you did. You were incredible. God, I can't believe it." He kissed her forehead, trembling. You're a hero, Avery, a hero." Megan guided the other passengers to safety, shouting instructions. Many had already begun hugging and thanking Avery from a distance. She felt overwhelmed, not fully comprehending that the entire world was watching her bravery unfold. The pilots were carefully carried away on stretchers. One of them, the first officer, gave a weak, incredulous smile as he saw Avery. "Kid, you saved the plane," he whispered hoarsely, barely able to stand. Avery gave him a small nod, barely able to speak through the mix of relief, exhaustion, and disbelief. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing every angle. Phones were raised to the sky, recording videos that would instantly go viral. Avery's bravery was no longer just a personal triumph. It was a global story of courage, calm, and determination in the face of near-certain disaster. Medical personnel guided her father and Avery away from the immediate chaos. Avery's legs felt like jelly, but she managed to stay upright. Her mind was still spinning with everything that had happened. The altitude loss, the failing engine, the landing on ice, the terrified passengers, the groaning fuselage. She had done the impossible. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Avery, can you tell us what it was like? How did you manage to fly the plane?" Avery looked at the frozen lake, the plane behind her, and the passengers she had saved. Her voice was small but clear. I just tried to stay calm. I remembered what my dad taught me. I focused on the plane and the people. I had to do it." The reporter nodded, astonished. "And the pilots, they're safe?" "Yes," Avery said, voice trembling. "They're okay, thanks to everyone and me, I guess." She blinked back tears. News crews scrambled around, capturing footage of her small frame standing on the ice, exhausted, shivering in the late afternoon cold. Every camera, every phone, every eye focused on the 12-year-old girl who had done the unthinkable. Her father hugged her again, whispering, "You were amazing, Avery. Everyone is going to know your name. You saved them all." Avery looked back at the plane one last time. The fuselage rested on the ice, slightly smoking, slightly cracked, but still intact. She remembered the cockpit, the alarms, the sparks, the sudden silence, the way the plane had responded to her hands. She had feared she wouldn't make it, yet here she was. Paramedics began escorting passengers to waiting ambulances and shelters. Avery helped where she could, making sure everyone was safe, even as the adrenaline finally began to fade. Her body shook from exhaustion, but her heart swelled with relief and pride. A helicopter hovered overhead, shining a spotlight down on the frozen lake. Emergency lights painted the ice red and blue. Avery stood there, small but unbroken, the hero of an impossible story. People whispered her name in awe. Some cried, some cheered. Everyone who had witnessed it understood. This girl had faced the unimaginable and triumphed. Her father held her close, whispering, "They'll write books about this. They'll tell the story for generations, but you'll always know what you did." Avery nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. She didn't feel like a hero yet. She felt tired, scared, and overwhelmed, but deep down she knew the truth. She had stepped into a pilot's seat when no one else could. She had landed a plane. She had saved lives. And the world would never forget it. As emergency crews finally guided the last passengers to safety, Avery looked at the horizon. The sun was dipping below the mountains, painting the frozen lake in gold and silver. Sparks had finally stopped flickering from the cockpit. Alarms were silent. The plane, though battered and smoking, had survived. Avery took a deep breath, shivering in the cold. She had faced fear, chaos, and near-certain death and survived. But more than that, she had proved something to herself. Courage doesn't come from size, age, or experience. It comes from heart, from focus, from determination when the world seems impossible. And as she stood there, small against the massive aircraft, surrounded by the passengers she had saved, Avery finally understood the truth. She had not just survived, she had become a hero. And in the hearts of every person who had witnessed the flight, she would live forever. The plane sat silently on the frozen lake, a monument to a girl's courage. And Avery, 12 years old, exhausted but unbroken, stepped forward into a world that would never forget the day she took control and saved them all.